Welcome back to Impact Makers, your product experience marketing podcast. And as always, we're delighted to have your company. Do us a favor and cast your minds back to January 2025.
Well, now you're asking, Kaylin.
We released an episode called Adapting to Ozempic, and at the time, it felt like we were getting ahead of a fascinating developing story. What we didn't realize was that it would become our most streamed episode ever. So, naturally, we thought we'd make a sequel.
Yes, a return to Ozempic, if you like. But for added impact, we have also recorded a companion piece to this one featuring experts in the fields of science and nutrition, human behavior, cultural influences, and product experience to work out how this story about controlled consumption is likely to progress, because it isn't an Ozempic weight loss story anymore, is it?
So if you want to understand how this story might develop, make sure you stream Impact Makers, GLP-1's What Happens Next. Later in this episode, we'll play a few clips to whet your appetite, assuming that you have one. But as Andrew has hinted, the innovation brief for food and drink brands seems to be getting harder. And that's because we've gained exclusive access to brand new research by MMR into people's life experiences around GLP-1 meds. 3,000 people, 5 markets, that's US, UK, Germany, Brazil, and China, and 3 main cohorts, GLP-1 considerers, users, and past users.
So please stick around because we will highlight the best of MMR's findings. We'll be talking to the wonderful Millie Diamond from consumer forecasting experts WGSN on why premium small bites is one of many strategic opportunities that lie ahead, and we'll be predicting just how big this thing could become.
So if you thought GLP-1s were a temporary disruption, think again. This is Impact Makers. GLP-1, Rewiring Consumption.
Now, those of you who tuned into our visualized episode, just search Impact Makers on YouTube, you'll find it. You'll know that I'm on record for saying that GLP-1s do not solve the obesity crisis. Now, I said that following groundbreaking meta-analysis, 37 clinical studies, over 9,000 people, and it found that most people quit those meds within a year. From everything we've heard, GLP-1s can be an unbearable experience for millions of people. And in MMR's research, side effects are the number one reason for quitting. Now, around 80% of users report at least one negative side effect. And these are nausea, dizziness, constipation, to name but 3. And we also know, as it stands, after quitting, only 1/4 of people generally around the world would actively consider a return to the medication.
And that's very telling, but just like many other facets to this story, this stat is a reflection of the here and now. And spoiler alert, this is a developing story. From MMR's research, we discover that almost everyone would stay on or go back on this medication if only it were cheaper with fewer side effects, which is a huge watch out for our industry because the next wave of better medications will arrive.
One of the most talked about examples is Eli Lilly's oral GLP-1 candidate, orforglipron. And the reason we think this matters is quite simple, really. It offers a low friction future for people who have achieved that weight loss and now just want to maintain it for longer. In other words, this story is moving from this sort of episodic weight loss treatment to something much closer to long-term appetite management.
And honestly, the more I digest MMR's research, the more I can see how this new pill could actually accelerate the first wave of GLP-1 uptake. Because for people still standing at the edge of this decision, there is suddenly the promise of more lasting change, which is not currently the case, Andrew, hence the assertion you made. Eli Lilly's intervention gives considerers and users a more credible answer, a low-friction maintenance route that could help preserve the weight loss they have fought so hard to achieve.
Well, there it is. You know, that pill is likely to remove one massive barrier to trial for sure.
What we can absolutely say is unfolding here is a much bigger threat to what food and beverage brands have been designing for years, which is immediate gratification and sufficient sensory appeal to entice people to come back. Put simply, we could be witnessing the end of wanting.
Well, yeah, we absolutely could. In the UK, 61% of GLP-1 users say that their hunger has reduced. 59% said that their cravings are down. In the US, 56% of people say they feel fuller more quickly. In Brazil, 55% say they feel fuller for longer. And globally, just over half say that that sort of food noise, that constant mental noise around food has simply disappeared.
And this gives consumers a level of control that many of them may never have experienced before.
Yeah. I mean, we're looking at clinical technologies that could give millions, possibly billions of people, not just help with weight loss, but a way to manage appetite over the long term. As we said earlier, the unfolding story here is much bigger than weight loss. It's about control, which means GLP-1s are not just changing what people eat, it's changing, as you say, what they want. And if that shift becomes easier, cheaper, and more sustainable, then this really stops being a temporary disruption, doesn't it? I think it becomes a sort of permanent reframe of consumption. But I think this is where the conversation starts to get more interesting for manufacturers, because the best responses, I think, will not necessarily look like products that are designed for people on GLP-1s. They're going to look like sharper answers to a wider cultural shift, consumers becoming more selective about when, why, and how they consume.
And this is exactly why we were struck by Kellanova's latest snack innovation strategy. Kellanova, as you may know, has been acquired by Mars, but latest product releases from Cheez-Its and RX Bar read like a bigger attempt to earn a place in more precise occasions, snacks that work harder, feel more intentional, and give people a better reason to choose them. And that feels like the opportunity we should be talking about here. GLP-1s may be accelerating the shift, but they are not the whole story. The bigger story is that consumption itself is becoming more considered.
So let's bring in Millie Diamond from the world's leading consumer forecasting research agency, WGSN. Now, Millie, tell us about some of the latest reports hitting the decks over there at WGSN.
Yeah, so we've got a real mix of things, as always, all really exciting. We're actually just starting our 2029 forecast process, which will mean rather than being 2 years out, we'll now be forecasting 2.5 years out. So we did our 2028 cycle at the beginning of 2026, and now we're starting our 2029 cycle. So you'll find our big ideas for food and drink 2029 is already out. And then following that will be our personas for 2029, and then our whole suite of 2029 macro forecast. So I think this will really help our clients.
So we're making this episode about GLP-1s and this growing incidence of appetite management that seems to be happening around the world. I did spot a report that you co-authored called Premium Small Bites. Why did you release this report now?
Yeah, so the reason for this is really that several long-term shifts have converged at this moment in time. So GLP-1 therapies are moving into the mainstream. So, you've seen that the pill is now available in the UK as an alternative to the injections. So that's in the US and the UK. There's also some other really interesting developments. So the University of Oxford has developed a hydrogel pill, which is a non-pharmaceutical pill which you swallow and it expands in your stomach and acts a bit like a gastric band. So that's in development at the moment.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, so that's super interesting. And because it's non-pharmaceutical, that will be available to a wider range of consumers. So it could be people that have come off Ozempic and want to maintain, or people that just want to lose a little bit of weight. And we've also seen ingredients. So there's a fibre ingredient that's just been approved by the EU, which boosts the release of GLP naturally in the body. So there's just so much momentum. And consumers are also increasingly snacking rather than eating these 3 traditional meals a day. And people are becoming more selective about what they're choosing to eat. So together, these shifts are really changing how consumers define value. And rather than seeking larger portions, they're really prioritizing quality, flavor, and satisfaction in every bite. And I think key to remember here is that this is not a passing fad. Like, this is a huge structural change to the food industry and a trend with significant impact.
Yeah, and when it comes to snacking, you're saying about every bite matters more. I mean, a case in point is what's happening to sales of premium chocolate in the US.
Yeah, so it was a stat from Lindt Chocolate in the US saying that sales of premium chocolate are up 17% amongst GLP users versus only 6.5% among non-users. And it may seem counterintuitive, but it really sits with what we've seen, which is that indulgence is becoming more intentional. If you only have one piece of chocolate instead of five, you're going to be much more willing to spend on that one piece. You want that one piece to really deliver. So you're optimizing that experience rather than maximizing the quantity. And it's really a value equation that's changing across food. So the question kind of shifts from how much food am I getting to was that worth eating, I guess.
Yeah, it's this idea of GLP-1s erasing almost low value reward
Mm.
occasions. Now, in your report, you outline 3 strategies for manufacturers where you think the money is going to go. Could you take us through them?
Yeah, sure. So the three key trends within this were bite-sized meals,
Hmm.
which is really about delivering satisfaction in fewer mouthfuls. Fresh on the go. So this is about premiumizing everyday food to go occasions, and then premium chocolate and sweet treats. So if we think about the kind of the bite-sized meals, it's really about compressing indulgence into smaller formats. And we saw this lovely example at a restaurant in London called Lilibet's, where they had this Prego on their dessert menu, which is basically a bite-sized steak sandwich. Not something that you would expect to see on a dessert menu, but it's a really nice example of this kind of savory bite that reflects this growing demand for kind of smaller, maybe more balanced ending to a meal, but it's still delivering that indulgence.
Yeah. The one that caught my eye was at Don's. Is that a restaurant as well in Australia? So
Yeah.
they had pasta on a spoon. So a single pasta had been made into a bite-sized meal experience. So is it all about GLP-1s or is there something else going on?
I don't think it's solely about GLP-1s. I think, you have to also think about the fact that the wellness economy has grown and grown and grown. People have become more concerned about longevity, wellness
Mhm.
lifestyles. That's very much playing into it as well. And people have become a lot more health focused.
Yeah.
So
So
there's
this
two
is
things.
about a collision of trends.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
So you mentioned bite-sized meals there. We got fresh on the go.
Yep. So fresh on the go. So if you think about your kind of grocery store, supermarket, fresh convenience range, this is really about upgrading that area through these premium ingredients, maybe some global flavors, portable formats, and mini indulgence. So, as I touched on before, consumers really are snacking more throughout the day, and they're again seeking greater value from those smaller eating occasions. And they don't really want to compromise on the quality or the flavor or experience in those small bites.
So another that I've seen is there's a restaurant in Dubai called Over, and it's gone viral recently with its flat coin burgers. So these are little
Oh, yeah.
tiny
Yeah.
burgers, and that to me plays exactly to this sort of on the go miniaturization, if you like. And something when we did our Asia episode was that over there is this trend towards small premium bites from a sort of cute virality point of view. So there is some sort of mileage in manufacturers miniaturizing these experiences because they just lend themselves to social media as well.
Yeah, in fact, we did have a whole report on minis, I think last year. And that was again driven by this kind of cute economy, treat culture. We called out, I think it was for 2026, glimmers, which are these little moments of joy throughout the day. But also, the demand that's being driven by the GLPs, so kind of the mini cocktails. There's quite a lot of places now that offer mini martini flights, for example. So you can try 3 different drinks, but you're only having kind of 2 or 3 sips per drink. So you're still getting the full experience, all the full flavor, but you're not consuming as much.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
finally, you talked about, and we have touched upon this, haven't we? This sort of premium chocolate and treats thread to your report.
Yeah. And I think what's really interesting is you go, especially in the UK, into any supermarket and you will see these chocolate bars being crammed full of all these additional ingredients and fillings. And that's partly because of the price of chocolate, right? It's been so expensive that producers have been putting a lot of other things into the chocolate to kind of bulk up the bar. And I think now what we're starting to see is kind of the counter trend to that, which is that consumers are going to start to prioritize the quality of these chocolate bars. So they might just want a tiny small square of super premium chocolate. They know exactly what it is that they're eating and they're getting. They know the provenance.
So this is a theme, isn't it, that runs through the entire report. Pleasure is, if you like, becoming denser. So let's sort of zoom out from all of this and consider then what food and beverage manufacturers should be thinking about more as they plan their innovation to 2029 and beyond. Because the dominant narrative that seems to be emerging, as I sort of referenced earlier, I think, it's this, if you like, erasing of low value reward occasions. And that can apply anywhere, as we've seen, to snacking, but equally to alcohol. You've had examples with meals. So in my view, the response here must be about rethinking what reward looks like. It's no longer necessarily about portion size as it was in the past.
Yeah, so I think a really interesting one to think about here is something that we forecast for 2028, which is sensory maximalism. And this is about how brands must really expand their products. You know, we've seen the texture, we've seen the novel mouthfeel, but this is about products that really stimulate before the first bite and then linger after the last bite by really amplifying the intensity with sound cues, with aroma, with visual intrigue, with play. This could be about interaction before consumption, so something that needs to be cracked or smashed or snapped.
So building in more rituals around that consumption moment.
Yeah, rituals and kind of really heightening that sensory experience beyond just when it goes into the mouth, I would say.
Yeah, I think your point on sensory maximalism is very valid. What I would say is that the research that we've done at MMR shows that there is a sensitization effect of GLP-1. So, for example, many consumers report that their experience of sweetness is far more intense or saltiness is more intense. And therefore, you've got to think of the in-the-mouth journey and that it doesn't become overwhelming too soon. Okay, look, for companies that want a demo of what WGSN can offer, where would you suggest people go?
Yeah, just go to WGSN.com.
Okay, and any sneak previews of what's coming up in the next month or so that you might want to let us know? Reports in the pipe?
We've just done a report on health and wellness around micro resilience, and then there'll be another mini to go kind of alongside that around micro rests, so you can kind of see where we're thinking in terms of health and wellness there. And then another one that's actually just dropped is Generation Beta Healthy Eating. And this is a generation that a lot of people won't really have thought about yet.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting one to kind of get stuck into.
Absolutely. I think when everyone's got a bit more time, we might get around to the beta generation. But let's go off for our micro rest now, and we'll catch up with you hopefully sometime in the future. But thank you so much, Millie, for giving us a real depth view of the miniaturization of meals, snacking and pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Andy.
Thank you.
As you will have gathered from this episode, the GLP-1 story is not only one of our industry's fastest moving stories, it's also the most disruptive when it comes to innovation and the rules of success that food and beverage manufacturers have subscribed to for decades. Which is why I brought together a range of experts to predict where this story goes next. Because in the last 12 months, it's moved in ways almost nobody predicted. That debate is now available. It's called Impact Makers, GLP-1, What Happens Next? And trust me, we think you'll find it thought-provoking. So to give you a flavor of the debate, here's a few clips to pique your interest. Here's Dr. Faraz Zurakat from the Irving Medical Center at Columbia University.
There needs to be recognition that these new generation incretin-mimetic therapies, these GLP-1 receptor agonists, are here to stay. They are having a positive influence well beyond obesity treatment. These are really going to be seen as cardiovascular and metabolic health medications, not simply obesity treatments. So I think that this is going to potentially really expand the uptake of these medications as they become more cost effective, more accessible. There's greater insurance coverage. So I think that this is really, we're going to see more and more individuals that are going to be treated with these medications for a variety of obesity related comorbidities. And so I think with this also creates opportunities, right? So we can think about, as we move forward, what are ways to further increase access? What are ways to mitigate the potential adverse side effects, predominantly gastrointestinal? How can we minimize lean mass loss and particularly skeletal mass loss? And are there combination therapies? Or are there ways that other industries can come in and sort of satisfy some of these areas for improvement?
We're very lucky to have Ferris on the team. As you'll hear, he misses nothing in terms of clinical evidence, and he also covers Eli Lilly's latest innovation, that appetite maintenance pill we mentioned, which offers the prospect of more appetites being controlled for longer, which raises another question. What does that do to the way we eat together? To answer that one, we spoke to our resident behavioral scientist, Dr. Paulina Lane.
So I think that brands need to stop thinking of this as a weight loss story and start thinking of it as a normalization of appetite control. So managing hunger, cravings, food noise, that's going to become the norm, and not just for people on GLP-1s, but for most people around them. And the new default people will measure themselves against will include smaller portions and more intentional choices. And the brands that win will be the ones who understand that trade-off sitting underneath that. The people will gain control, but they may lose some spontaneity, some indulgent freedom. And the brands that figure out how to give people back a little of that in smaller, maybe smarter ways are the ones with a future in this.
So, the norms around the table are shifting for everyone. But there's one more twist, and it's about what actually happens on the tongue. Because one of the most surprising revelations from the research was that, for many, GLP-1s are not muting taste experiences, but they are amplifying them. Here's sensory scientist Fiala Mayring.
There's going to have to be a sensory recalibration, for sure. Changes in taste could even mean that experiences can quickly become overwhelming. So what used to be pleasantly indulging now quickly trips into too much. And as a result, consumers start selecting foods that sit in what I'd like to call a safe sensory window. That's where flavour and texture and mouthfeel are predictable, manageable, repeatable. So what that means is that flavour needs recalibration, not maximisation. It's about balance rather than impact. And portion size interacts with perception. Fundamentally, fewer bites means bites have to carry more sensory weight. And now this may leave space for texture to play a bigger role. And I'm actually really interested to see how this goes, whether texture, if it goes the same way, for example, does smooth, soft, easy to swallow formats reduce effort and perceived risk.
This surprising sensory shift illustrates that brands will need to work out how they reconcile the preferences of a growing cohort of people with their wider consumer base, and exactly why product strategies such as premium small bites could accelerate faster than we think. So that's just a taste, pun intended, of our companion episode, GLP-1, What Happens Next? And it's out now, wherever you're listening.
Brand success depends on many things. Getting noticed helps. Getting chosen helps more. Your campaign can create interest, but it's your product that decides what happens next. MMR. Because eventually, your product gets a turn.
To get the full 360 on this developing story, we should probably have a social call. And as if by magic, I'm delighted that Katie Hedge, our new social media correspondent from the Together agency, has appeared. Welcome, Katie. Great to have you on the pod. Are you okay with social call?
Thanks, Caitlin, and it's great to be back. Well, before the Z factor made sense because TikTok was almost synonymous with Gen Z. But today, that's no longer true. So, latest stats from the Pew Center in the US show that 84% of US adults use YouTube, 71% use Facebook, 50% use Instagram. And when it comes to TikTok, 44% of Americans aged 30 to 49 claim to use it. So I guess social media has become a much more mainstream source of product discovery, opinion, and cultural commentary across generations.
Excellent. Social call it is then. Now, as you know, Katie, we've been trying to keep pace with GLP-1s this episode. How is this story playing out across the various social channels?
Well, as we all know, the real debate rarely happens in a studio. That said, many of the themes that you've been discussing here are reflected across social media as well. Spend time here and what you'll witness is a very human story moving incredibly quickly. Many people are getting to grips with a new kind of control over appetite and with situations when that control disappears.
I think this is why TikTok is so fascinating. It can act like an early warning system. You get to see those anxieties forming before the industry is fully caught up. Now, for this episode, we wanted you to investigate the lives of people who have recently stopped medicating.
Yes, you did. And there are some broad themes to report. The first is the sudden return of food noise. Now, this is probably the strongest and most emotionally compelling theme. The phrase food noise appears constantly across TikTok. After reducing or stopping medication, many creators describe the return of hunger, cravings, and impulsiveness. Let's listen into Minding My Calories, who has just quit Mounjaro.
So after stopping MJ, hunger returned with a bang, as you all know, 3 weeks later. And I'm not joking, it was the most scariest thing ever because of the intenseness of the hunger. Like, when I say it was intense, it was intense. It was 24/7. It was deep hunger pains. And when I'd had something to eat, I'd still feel hungry. It was a lot. But I knew that this was just my body adjusting. And you just need to get that in your brain. Like, it doesn't last forever. It will settle down after a few weeks. Everybody's different, obviously, but it did for me. And you just have to be ready for it, prepared for it, and just realise that you're going to have a few weeks of just feeling like shockingly hungry and feeling rubbish and panicking. But don't panic, because honestly, it does go away.
That really does make it real, Katie, this notion of feeling unsupported. It's losing that sense of freedom from constantly thinking about food.
Completely, and she's not alone. In MMR's research, 65% of UK participants who are in the same position as our creator want more support from brands after weight loss. And only 24% can easily find products that help them after quitting.
What's your second theme, Katie?
Okay, well, this is the reality that TikTok tends to frame GLP-1s as some kind of lifestyle reset and not as a quick fix. Most creators aren't saying, just take this injection and you're sorted. Instead, they're talking about setting protein targets, the importance of hydration, long-term maintenance plans, and so forth. And many TikTok users don't actually stop completely. Instead, they might pivot to lower or less frequent doses, like my journey with Mark.
So here's the truth. I am still on it because I am not there yet. Yes, I'm at goal. Yes, I feel better than I ever have. But the habits, well, the day-to-day mindset, the automatic choices, they are still a work in progress for me. And I'm not ashamed to admit that. I spent most of my life building habits that have not served me. And it's going to take time to unlearn them properly. So for me right now, it's about stability. It's about learning how to live a normal life without slipping back into the old one. So yeah, if you're on maintenance and you feel lost or guilty for still needing the support, please hear me out. You're not failing. You're learning how to live again. And even if you are still on this journey and you're still losing, the same applies to you too. Some of us might need this long term, and that's okay. We aren't going to know until we get to the end and test it. So yeah, I'd rather stay consistent than fall back to square one.
And you can hear how emotional his journey is. We know from MMR's research that around 80% of people arrive at GLP-1s feeling stuck in their attempts to manage their weight. And suddenly they're in control, with around 3/4 admitting that their overall well-being and outlook on life improved. And feeling that for the first time in years, they're no longer fighting themselves every day. But despite this, you can tell from Mark's video that he's negotiating a new identity as well as resets in his confidence and self-perception.
Absolutely. His journey is as much psychological as it is physical, for sure. And it's reflected by so many videos. So my final theme is around how success is being defined by TikTokers when they graduate to the weight maintenance phase. Shayla Kay talks about this.
Hi, I'm Shayla. I've lost 80 pounds with the help of a GLP-1 medication, and I have been maintaining that for over 1 year now. I am still taking a small weekly dose as part of my maintenance plan and well under the care of my provider. Today, I am sharing some of the hardest and the best parts of moving into maintenance on a GLP-1 medication. Hardest part for me, mentally adjusting to the fact that I wasn't chasing a number on the scale anymore. When you're on a GLP-1, you get used to seeing that scale move almost every day or however often you're weighing. And so when you stop seeing that move, it's a shift. The best part? Freedom! On a GLP-1, I finally felt like food wasn't controlling me. I was making decisions without fear.
Okay, so she's saying that in the weight loss phase, it was the number on the scales, and that the metric has now moved to stability. So can TikTok offer any advice to food and drink brands?
In terms of innovation hotspots, it's really about foods that can work harder. That creates opportunities for high protein products, portion controlled formats, hydration solutions, and so on. And manufacturers are already on the case here. The other thing I will say is that TikTokers really value honesty around GLP-1 use. It's fair to say that whilst there are some common experiences, GLP-1 journeys can be highly individual and difficult to predict, so brands need to be sensitive to this. That said, there are many examples of influencers doing unboxing videos of their GLP-1 medication, and some are even offering discount codes as they unbox. So this highlights just how fashionable these medications are seen by many, especially by so-called biohackers.
On our companion episode, What Happens Next?, we highlight some evidence that GLP-1s could be slowing down certain age-related markers. So as we discussed, the idea that GLP-1s slow down the aging process is far from being proven, but it is being explored. Has this possibility been picked up by social media at all?
So I looked into this one by checking out Reddit forums. And the conversations here are actually quite sophisticated. People don't believe GLP-1s are magic anti-aging drugs. Instead, they're asking whether they reduce the biological processes that make us age badly. One discussion on the R longevity community summed it up particularly well. GLP-1s are best understood as metabolic stress reducers. The discussion argues that any longevity benefit is probably greatest in people with certain conditions like chronic inflammation, rather than already healthy people. The general tone is promising, but don't get ahead of the science. And that's actually quite reassuring.
Well, we shall see how that story develops. Katie, we've really enjoyed this social call, and we'll see you again next episode. So if it's not already clear, the GLP-1 story has moved on again. This is no longer just a conversation about weight loss, willpower, injections, or a small group of early adopters. It's becoming a conversation about what happens when unprecedented levels of appetite control move from the clinic into everyday culture, and not just for a 12-month window. With oral maintenance options now in the pipeline, the bigger disruption may be what happens after the weight is lost, when millions of people try to preserve that achievement for years.
Yeah, I think it's hard to think of a bigger story in our industry right now because the evidence is starting to show up everywhere, right? In MMR's research, in public health numbers, in grocery baskets, in all this reformulation work from major manufacturers. And it's also in the way people talk about protein, fiber, hydration, gut health, portion size, indulgence now, which is also shifting, of course. We heard in our conversation with Millie Diamond that it's not just less pleasure, but better pleasure, more concentrated, more memorable, more rewarding. I think because in a world where appetite is becoming so selective, every eating and drinking occasion has to earn its place, right? And that's becoming something that we're hearing all over the place.
So if you're a brand team listening to this and you take one question away, it's this. For a century, we've been working on how we make consumers crave us. That pursuit is not dead, but it is no longer enough. The harder, more urgent pursuit for brands and innovators is, how do we make ourselves worth choosing, even when the craving is gone?
So we really hope that our GLP-1 special has expanded your thinking. If you want to learn more about MMR's research, you just have to head over to mmr-research.com, and you should find a link there that enables you to download any of the 5 regional reports that we produced. And please do share this episode with colleagues who you think deserve to hear some of the stories that we've raised around appetite, experience, and where growth comes from next.
Don't forget our social channels for more insights. That's LinkedIn and Instagram @ImpactMakersPod. And please like and subscribe because we're only 20 episodes in and we need your support. We will be back after the summer break. Until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.